Hi, we're Ralph and Lahni D'Amicis with our annual Chinese New Year forecast. It's kind of interesting that we create a calendar that's based on the regular calendar year, but we do our forecast not on the first day of the year, but based on the Chinese New Year. What is the Chinese New Year? It is determined by whenever you have the new moon in Aquarius. So it could happen anytime in Aquarius. So between the middle of January to the middle of February, when the sun and the moon are at the exact same degree conjunct in Aquarius, that's what determines the Chinese New Year. So on calendars, people will note it on the first full day. And in fact, that's when they celebrate the Chinese New Year, the first full day. So if the new moon happens the night before, they will put it on the next day. In our case, because we're astrologers, we want the exact moment that it is exact. The new moon is exact. So we have it on our calendar this year. It's late, February 15th, and it'll be celebrated on February 16th.
Right. And this is what's called to the Chinese the springtime festival. And this is why the groundhog looks for his shadow. The groundhog looks for a shadow to see is it going to be an early spring or a late spring. Well, this year it's going to be a late spring because it's taking place at 27 degrees Aquarius, very late in the sign.
Right.
It's after this point that the seeds will begin to sprout in the northern hemisphere. Because basically during the new moon in Aquarius, all the energy consolidates in the earth. You can balance an egg on end on that day if you want to. And then after that, as the energy starts coming up again, the seeds get the message to sprout, and the new growing season begins.
And you know how logical we are. I like to describe it like this. The sun is the natural ruler of Leo. Leo is the time when the sun gets to be the most sun-like and has the strongest energy and the most power. The sign opposite from Leo is Aquarius. So by extension, that means the sun is the least sunlight. The sun is not as warm, as strong, as powerful. And so this is a better marker for starting a year because now all the energy has drawn in and it has only one way to go from there, is to start to build and develop. So from growing cycles or any other kind of cycles, it makes a more natural kind of point to start a year and therefore to have a forecast for what's ahead.
Right, and it's also the most celebrated festival in the world, which is a good reason to celebrate. In fact, how here in the the Bay Area, north of San Francisco, it's a very big festival. I mean, it dwarfs Christmas in some ways and has a better parade too, with
dragons.
Yes,
but this year's not the year of the dragon. This year is going to be the year of the dog. And for those of you who like to have the correlation between the Western zodiac and the Chinese zodiac, the year of the dog correlates with the astrological sign of Libra. And so in the Chinese system, the animal years are based on the position of Jupiter, but not in a tropical zodiac like we use in the West, in the sidereal zodiac. So the Jupiter right now is in Scorpio, which sidereally is Libra. So Libra is the correlation between the year of the dog.
Right. And Jupiter, is the biggest planet. It's so large that it's actually larger in mass than all of the other planets put together. So the whole cycle of the 12 years of the Chinese cycle are based upon the 12 years it takes Jupiter to go through the 12 signs.
Yeah, Jupiter generally stays in a sign for about a year.
Right. So what's going to happen this year? Well, deal with the big picture first, at least in the United States. People are going to think, what's going to happen in Washington? Are we going to finally have a year of common sense and goodwill and general calm?
Getting along.
No. If you are hoping for that, just give up those hopes. It's not going to happen. We're in for another year of chaos.
Well, and a little bit of Aquarius means chaos anyway, because it's the sign of, the public square and the, the general population. It isn't a very personalized sign. It's not an individualized sign. But this year, elevated in Washington, D.C. is Uranus, which some call the modern ruler of Aquarius, and it's really a change agent. It's a rebel, it's an innovator, it's an instigator. So
Eruptions, discord, it changes things up very, very suddenly. And that's right overhead in the sign of Aries, a Mars-ruled sign, so it's going to be an aggressive energy this year. And because of how the chart's laid out, a major number of the planets that are part of the new moon are all in the 7th house.
you say aggressive, but definitely take charge kind of an energy. And you can make that work for you. You know, you don't have to just see it played out in other people as well. But we're looking at the global forecast, and this is really overhead in Washington, D.C.
Well, usually we find in these charts, the planet that's overhead says a lot about the kind of people who will rise to the fore. So you can expect that in Washington and along the entire East Coast especially, you're going to see fairly unusual, dramatic people rise to the fore and become prominent in the course of the year and want to disrupt things. So it's going to be pretty raucous. Aries is, after all, a bellicose kind of sign. Now, because the sun and the moon are in the 7th house, that is the house of litigation. It's the house of the courts. It's the house of working things out, the scales. And so you're going to have a lot of litigation going on the West Coast, isn't it? I mean, on the East Coast. In
It's
Washington.
also the house of partnerships.
That's
and
true.
partnerships. So if we can find a climate where people are actually willing to work together, if they have
That's true.
some ideas about how to come together, and I think that there's going to be some events, some opportunities throughout the course of the year to try to find that common ground. But you're right, the scales are always balancing, and so we'll have to see how many people sort of rise to that imperative to try to work together.
Well, I think the people who are going to be really the leaders in this are going to be women this year, because conjunct the sun and the moon to one side is Venus in Pisces. It's a very strong position. It's called the exaltation position. It's the position of vision and compassion. And Venus is all about making partners, as you said, but it's also about having a vision for where you're going, and then the compassion to understand why you're going there.
Well, and then the other partner energy is on the other side of the sun-moon conjunction. That's Juno, who was, of course, the wife.
Right.
Juno, the asteroid, is a very strong planet and very feminine energy. And I think we're going to see the rise of, or the continuation, rather, of the Year of the Woman getting stronger and stronger with this highlighting of this feminine energy.
And after all, 2018 is a 2. It's a feminine energy. And next to Juno, in fact, is Mercury in Aquarius. So this is about, once again, an exalted position. It's a brilliant position for Mercury. And so having 2 planets in powerful rulerships like this say a lot about, and being personal planets, saying a lot about...
And feminine planets.
And feminine, well, Mercury's not in the feminine planet, though Aquarius is one of the more androgynous of the masculine planets. Has a lot to do with that it's going to be individual people. It's going to be people, not the big figures, but the people working in the trenches, the people with their hands in the situations who are going to make the big difference. Now, the other planet in rulership this year is Saturn in Capricorn. And Saturn, of course, is a restrictor, and in Capricorn, it's in its most practical, feminine sign. So there is going to be a certain sense of serious women saying...
Or women being taken seriously is another interpretation of that for me. And because Saturn is just joining Pluto, who's been parked in Capricorn forever, it seems, on my rising, but that's another story. I'm sort of hoping that Saturn will sort of put a structure to all the disruption that has been happening in the kind of male-dominated areas that Pluto has been sort of unearthing a lot of hidden secrets from.
And anytime you have a planet that's in rulership, it gets to be who it is. You know, it's kind of it's in its favorite playground. It's in its favorite office. It's sitting at its most comfortable desk. It's the most effective, and it can oftentimes dominate the situation. So you have Venus, Mercury, and Saturn in rulerships this year. And there are definitely pretty strong players here. Now, just because Washington is going through this doesn't mean the whole country is going through this, though we, of course, can watch it on the news. Out on the West Coast, you have a very different game playing. Because on the West Coast, we have overhead Venus, that lovely Venus in Pisces overhead, and Neptune in Pisces, the great dreamer. But Neptune is a very important business planet, also overhead. And Neptune goes down through LA. Venus goes down through
The coast, the northern coast.
The northern coast, and goes down along San Francisco. So you can figure on very important women coming to the fore this year on the West Coast.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that in that way, because, you know, there's, at least out here, people who live in California see a very, very distinct difference between the energy of San Francisco and the energy of LA. And this year it's highlighted by the planetary lines that go through it. And I'm sure every year there's a different planetary line. But because the coastline of California takes a dog leg in, the planetary line that is down the coast isn't going to be the same line that goes through LA. So it really describes a very different kind of energy. Although that Neptune line in LA can be very interesting for innovations and ideas in both the film world and the technology and gaming world, because they're very large in that LA area, and that Neptune is a very important player in both of those activities.
Oh, exactly. It's the great. I mean, Neptune was discovered in the late 1800s, and think of how many. That's when movies were first developed. Was in the late 1800s. That's when Edison was doing a lot of his work. Was at about the time right after Neptune was discovered. So it's think of how much that movies, television, those types of visual references and tools have affected how the world sees itself.
Right.
You know, travel films alone, I mean, tie us together. So
we could talk just a little bit about this Uranus line, because it really does describe down into the rest of the.
Oh, you mean the Chiron line?
No, I'm sorry, Chiron.
Yes, that's okay. But that's the
exactly. I was thinking about the Chiron or the Uranus also going down into Central and South America. So they're kind of the two bookends that describe.
Yes, very much so. In fact, I think it's interesting too, the Chiron, which is considered a healing energy, and it's also in Pisces. So here you have Chiron, Neptune, and Venus all in Pisces, running the entire span along there, all relating to compassion, healing. Neptune, many times people feel it relates to hospitals and large healing systems. Chiron relates to natural healing, and that goes down through Colorado,
Montana, Wyoming.
Yeah, and then it goes down, and then you have Venus up along the coast.
Yeah.
And I also think that point right up there, I think that Vancouver and Seattle are in for a really interesting year this year, because you have a crossing. You have Venus overhead, you have a crossing of the Saturn descending line and a Pallas Athena rising line. I think they're going to see a lot of very serious partnerships. I think you're going to see international partnerships and more people. I mean, it's already an area. I mean, Seattle and Washington State's already packed with technology. I think you're going to see even more dominance within the field and more international partnerships coming through that area this year. So I think that both there and LA, I think, are both really good areas for investment this year.
Well, and I was thinking about, I know you're going to go off to the other part of the world, but when I was looking at the chart before, I was very interested in the fact that from Mexico through to South America are bookended by the energies of the planetary line of Chiron and Uranus on the other side. And we talked a little bit before about the fact that the canal project is going on very close to that Uranus line.
Right.
I've been concerned about all of the earthquakes that are going on in that strip, Central America, and of course Chiron over Mexico is very telling, especially since it goes up through the central part of the United States, because Chiron, of course, is the wounded healer, and there's been a lot that has needed to heal both in Mexico on their own internally and with relations between the United States and Mexico. So I think it's very interesting that those are going to be features.
I think that's an interesting point because, Neptune is in Pisces, or Chiron is in Pisces. Pisces relates, among other things, to petrochemicals, kind of interestingly enough. And where Chiron is going through is actually through the area where a lot of new oil exploration is going on, where a lot of natural gas is being produced very, very cheaply. And the place it's being shipped to primarily is Mexico. And the biggest challenge Mexico has always had in terms of really growing has been brownouts. They don't get enough energy. And now for the first time, they've built 4 or 5 new pipelines, and they're shipping huge amounts of very inexpensive gas to Mexico. And it's one of the reasons why we're having so little immigration, because there's so much more work now in Mexico in manufacturing. Even now, a tremendous number of our cars are manufactured in Mexico. In fact, Mexico has agreed to send, I think, Argentina huge numbers of cars, and Argentina is going to send them huge amounts of wheat.
Well, and then the other end of that bookend of that energy in that area of the world is that Uranus, and of course, I already mentioned the earthquakes, but I mean that Panama Canal project is, you can't describe it as more Uranian than.
Yes.
Anything. I mean, when the canal was first built, you thought, wow, who would have an idea to build this canal, this scope of this project? And now they're making it so much bigger, and all of this activity and innovation. Now they can do things that they couldn't even think about doing when they initially did the project. We watched some fascinating things, and tying in the Year of the Woman with that, a lot of the engineers on that project are women.
True. Exactly.
Which
Many of
is
the chief
fascinating.
engineers. It's also interesting that Uranus, of course, is so close to Venezuela, which of course is having continuing transformation,
Disruption,
basically on the verge of revolt.
That's Uranus.
Yeah. And last time that we had Uranus coming down along the same coast, there were a lot of earthquakes along that Pacific coast in there, and that was another time when
Chile.
we had a lot of disruption in Washington as well. And that's actually another point. When you get planets overhead, these are physiological changes. I'm very concerned this year because we're having Mars and Vesta. Mars in Sagittarius, a fire sign. Mars is hot anyway. Vesta, the flame, right over the eastern sections of Australia. It's very possible they will have a recurrence of the fires they've had before.
Yeah.
And that it's incredibly important. I think you'll see that they're going to be very, very vigilant about that. But when you get that type of energy there, it's powerful. There's no getting away from it.
Sagittarius, a fire sign, a very close conjunction. Vesta, the flame, and Mars is a very fiery energy. So we'll have to keep an eye on that.
Yeah. So basically, in the United States, where Washington, the East Coast, is going to be chaotic, and there's going to be a lot of litigation, a lot of going back and forth. The West Coast is going to be a lot more empowered because the sun is much higher in the sky. It takes place up in the 9th house there. You have Venus overhead.
In Pisces. I'm going to the beach.
Exalted. You have Mercury highly elevated as well. You have late Gemini rising. It's a much more empowered position, but that's because they're able to be a little more independent, I think, and they have different stars.
Exactly.
Now looking globally, when you go to the website, go to spaceandtime.com and go looking for these forecasts, this TV show, which you're maybe watching on your TV, you can also find on the website. There's a whole written analysis as well that sometimes goes into different details that we can't cover on the TV show. Something that I said in that, which I thought was interesting, was that in some ways this year was drawn kind of like a cartoon, big thick lines, big swatches of color, because so much of it is so obvious, especially if you do keep up on international affairs, global economics and such. You see these trends developing. Where's Jupiter? Where's the big guy? Jupiter is in a line that goes right through Beijing, right? And you see the continuing rise of China. Now, it also goes up through Korea. What's interesting about that is, even though there's all the discord going on with Korea, what else is going on this year? The Winter Olympics. The year in which the Brazilians had the Olympics, Jupiter was directly over Brazil, directly over Rio.
Right.
Directly over Rio. So Jupiter is the planet of athleticism. Sagittarians,
Sure.
You see a lot of Sagittarians, a lot of Pisceans are professional athletes and are serious athletes, better way to put it. and Jupiter's going right up through that area, but you really are seeing...
Well, you said it went through Brazil, but now it's
Now it's-
overhead.
now
Or
it's-
the same line is
overhead
overhead in
Beijing.
In Beijing.
And then also through Western Australia as well. And this is Jupiter in Scorpio. So, but it's, remember, sidereal Libra, so it's about making partnerships, but using power cooperatively. So you're going to see this part of the world working kind of with their own gravity. Remember, Jupiter has its own solar system. It has a huge collection of moons. They don't even know quite how many, maybe 30 moons. They keep discovering more. It's got its own gravity. So when you get Jupiter over an area, that area kind of becomes the center of the world.
Well, and there's a lot going on there with Korea and North Korea and South Korea and China and all of that, you know. So if we can get some of that Jupiter energy kind of, you know, the magnanimous part of Jupiter working in that energy, that looks to be a positive thing.
Oh yeah, well Jupiter is ultimately a very positive energy because it's an expansive energy, but this means that China will be expanding their reach once again, while the United States is, especially the East Coast, is under chaos. So it's not going to be standing in their way. But if anyone thought that they would be kind of backing off on taking over land in the South China Sea, not happening. They're going to be expanding that as well. So now, I thought that it was interesting that Saturn and Pluto is going over New Zealand. And it's very possible that they may become a little more restrictive on immigration. And it wouldn't be surprising. I mean, people, change their location, and there's many people looking for a safe haven. And one of the things problems that New Zealand has dealt with is very wealthy people going to New Zealand and buying a second home, building an estate there, so they could retreat there later in life. Well, the problem is that you get the problem of the absentee landlord, which can oftentimes cause problems for a country because they're not part of the community. So it may be that New Zealand in this coming year, there will be a certain conservatism and a certain restriction of this type of investment or this type of immigration, or maybe in immigration generally.
And we didn't talk about Europe.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, they are coming home to themselves this year.
Yeah, there's nothing really overhead. There's
Right.
nothing really, they can really kind of describe their own experience.
Yeah. And in fact, what's interesting is that when you go over, it's almost all what's called IC lines. These are the lines below your feet, and it's the place where you tend to come to home at that planet. What's interesting is that Saturn is going over Spain, right, and England, Ireland, that area. Well, England, of course, with their Brexit, has been dealing with all kinds of constriction. Saturn is a constrictive energy. In Capricorn is one of its most constrictive energies. And what's Spain going through? It's going through the Catalonia crisis, where Catalonia and Barcelona, they all want to say, ta-ta, we don't want to be part of this anymore. So they're having a major, no, you can't go, restriction going on. And doesn't that Saturn and Capricorn at the IC, no, you have to stay home, you cannot leave. Isn't that the description? I mean, that's the description of Saturn and Capricorn. Your mom grabbing your arm saying, no, don't go.
Well, and then we have the Pluto energy in
Right.
in Germany and Switzerland.
Yeah. Pluto and Capricorn.
Yeah.
So you're going to see...
There's a lot of pulling back.
Pulling back, and also Pluto in Capricorn. But that also has a lot to do with transforming kind of traditional structures, So, I mean, even the idea that that Merkel said, the Syrians are welcome here. Well, they realized the fact that their population was getting so old that they were not going to be able to sustain this. They didn't have enough young people. Having all these immigrants come in from Syria,
An influx of new youth.
gave them a future that they didn't have before.
Exactly.
Boy,
that's really using the Pluto energy to transform.
Exactly, which is a transformation and a transformation of a traditional thinking. It's not like they're not going to learn German, but they'll probably also learn English. And the Syrians are one of the nicest immigrants you could possibly have. They're very secular. They're very well educated. What they dealt with was basically one of the first, climate change wars. That's what happened to Syria. Basically, it was a climate change war. The country went dry. Now, I think it's interesting that, for many years, ever since 1946, 45, the Bretton Woods Agreement, when the United States said, hey, we'll patrol the oceans, don't you worry about that. We'll build a navy, you don't have to worry about that. And we'll buy everything that you make. During that period of time, and with the Marshall Plan, where we basically loaned Europe money to rebuild after the war, Europe became a bit of an American project. For good or for worse, but they became an American project. Well, now that the United States is in some chaos, and with Saturn in Capricorn and Pluto in Capricorn, and there's a certain withdrawing because, in truth, maintaining the Bretton Woods Agreement has meant that half of our budget goes to military.
Right.
No other country does that. Half of our budget that should go to infrastructure, should go to education, should go to our future, all goes into the military in order to maintain this huge military to protect the rest of the world. As we're withdrawing from it because it's really not sustainable, Europe is doing what? They're coming home to themselves. They're starting to say, we are adults. We have a very long history. We're prosperous countries now. We have the European Union. We don't have border guards every place. We can travel easily. We can speak each other's languages. Let's act like adults and let's work together. And what I think is interesting is that when you look at the chart, you have Ceres is the one outlier, all the way over by himself. And we may have the sense this year, at least, that someone is manipulating things. That someone is manipulating things, but also, hopefully we'll have a sense that someone is watching out for us like a shepherd. Ceres is the shepherd, and Leo's watching out for us. Now, on a global political sense, where is Ceres overhead? Ceres is overhead right through here, up through Turkey, the Ukraine, and right up there, Moscow.
Right.
So you're going to have a very strong sense that people from Moscow may be pulling the strings quite a bit, which is not really that surprising. It's some of the wealthiest people in the world. I mean, they have the entire resources of a country about the size of Italy in the hands of a few hundred, oligarchs. Well, you can do a lot if you can pay enough people off, don't you think? So it's a very interesting year. Go to spaceandtime.com, read the rest of the forecast, and
Happy New Year.
Wishing you a great year ahead in the year of the dog.